Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
You are very welcome along. We are just over a week until the beginning of the 2022 Six Nations. On top of that, we now have the lay of the land sorted when it comes to the knockout stages of the Heineken Champions Cup as well. So the rugby season clicking beautifully into gear. Brian O'Driscoll is with us. Brian, how are you getting on?
Very good, Owen, and you?
All well. Is it too late to say happy birthday to you? Big birthday?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Someone said on the school run, and one of my wife's friends, I was like, God, it's like people that do the birthday week. It's like dragging the arse out of it. No, it is too late. What is it? The 27th is nearly a week. So no. I was actually doing a thing with Paul Howard last night, and he was taking the mickey out of me, calling it Trickmas. So it feels like it's really labour. That's the problem with social media. There's no escaping now. I was guilty of it because I posted a picture of a cake with someone's, the hotel that was staying at very kindly got me a cake to my room, and it was for another Brian, Bryan. So so close but so far away.
I was wondering, are you a birthday week guy? Clearly you've dissed the idea of a birthday week notion there, so I'm guessing
43,
no.
Right? I'm 43. Okay. Who celebrates, you've no harm in celebrating a biggie. I think everyone's entitled to celebrate a biggie, but 43 is pretty nondescript. So no, it's nice to do you know what? Nice to mark it with your family and see the excitement of your kids, and they're not really bothered about you, but more about the cake that they're going to have. So that, you kind of live vicariously through them as well.
I think since we've last been chatting to you, you were swinging a club in a professional capacity as well.
Yeah, I managed to swing a gig out to Abu Dhabi with HSBC. So I managed to play in the Pro-Am with Shane Lowry on Wednesday last week, and good crack. Poor team showing, but unsurprisingly he played pretty well and kind of was holding us together, but you could tell from very early on that we were not going to feature in the prizes.
Do you get chatting to many of the other tour professionals when you're on those gigs, or is it mostly the Irish contingent sticking together?
No, you get to know a few of them over the course of the last few years. I wouldn't say that I know them well, but having kind of quick chats with not know Westwood, but know him to have a chat to Poulter likewise. Perez I met for the first time, who kind of came over and introduced himself, which, sometimes you kind of go, jeez, where, that you forget that these are rugby fans as well sometimes. And then obviously the Irish guys, talked to Rory for a while. We were in a PCR queue together, so we were chatting away, and then went out for dinner with Harrington and Shane and caddies and Shane's coach Neil Manship as well. So always good entertainment, even if the food choice was pretty poor at Harrington.
Oh, good, do tell.
I don't know. It was not what you would have anticipated. Anyone going to dinner. It was like a Tex-Mexy sort of place.
Okay.
Anyway, because Shane, we went to another place, a really nice Asian fusion place, and Shane was going there on the last night, and we were going to somewhere else. And he was saying that it was his fourth time there that week, and he said it's so good I can't turn it down. Other than that absolute hole that we went on Wednesday night. So yeah, it wasn't great, but sure. What can you do?
What can you do?
You're not going to get it right. You're not going to get it right every time, are you?
No,
anyway, we're blaming Porrig for it because he chose it.
That is throwing him under the bus substantially this morning, it must be said. We should talk about the rugby, and we should talk about the fact that the Six Nations launched this week. Does this bring back horrifying memories for you, great memories for you, the launch of the Six Nations? I know it's all done online at the moment, but flying to some location, having to say nice things about the English and Welsh captains right beside you?
Johnny does not know how good he has it having it virtually. And I'm sure he was probably, well, I don't know if he's ever been there. Certainly there wouldn't have been any in-person event. It used to be, it was one of the things that you looked forward to least, going over, having the same conversation 25 times, the awkwardness of all the posed pictures with captains, the one where you had to be face to face and staring at one another, like, and as the photographer was trying to get the light right and staring lovingly into one another's eyes. And only about 5 years in did someone say to me, you should really just look at someone's ear, because it still gives the same eye line. You don't actually have to look straight into their soul. So after a few years, I started doing that, just catching an ear, and it did make it a little bit more comfortable. You don't realize how horrible it is staring into someone's eyes, other than your wife's, if you have to do it for a long period of time.
Because I imagine as well that once you get used to the rhythms of the season, once you get to the end of January, middle of January, your body just kind of knows, right, okay, it's showtime, and you're not really in the sort of let's make friends mode. You know that this is the most important period of the season.
Yeah, it's nicey, because you know these guys, particularly over an extended period of time. Most captains have been around a while, so they've gotten to know the individuals. If they've been captains before, they've had to captain against them, sit beside them at functions, after match functions, gotten to chew the fat with them. Sometimes you might have toured on a Lions tour with them. So there's lots of circumstances where you could be friendly, but it doesn't mean that you always hit it off. Sometimes there's always a little bit of niggle with one or two of them, or there's been an incident, or you don't have kind of a connection of any sort, or there's a language issue. So they can be awkward things at times, but then other times you just revert into type of being quite friendly with people. So it depends on the circumstance and the individual. But yeah, it's a necessary evil. You're just getting through it. You're trying to not bore yourself with giving the same soundbite over and over again, but not catch yourself out or catch your team out, or give scope for some form of clickbait or just some sort of headlines. You're just trying to be mindful of all of that, because there'll be so much conversation to be had throughout the Six Nations anyway. So it's the preamble to just getting involved and getting stuck in a couple of weeks' time.
I think nowadays everybody's just happy to let Eddie Jones take the spotlight, and everybody else just fade into the background, and that seems to have been the case, relatively speaking, this year as well. And we will get to Eddie Jones in a moment, but the news from an Ireland perspective is a pretty positive one, I guess, from the COVID enforced absences for a few teams off the schedule over the last little while. Ireland have a relatively clean bill of health. Obviously James Lowe wasn't in the squad, Ian Henderson is out as well. So what it comes to is the situation now where we looked, and I guess this was true from seeing the Ireland squad, we get to a situation where Ireland's out half potential is at its ceiling right now in terms of having players available. Johnny Sexton is back, he's playing really well. Joey Carbery, we haven't seen him back, but he is going to be back from an Ireland camp's perspective. So this dynamic's going to be really interesting. If we start with Johnny Sexton, first of all, your impressions of his return to the Leinster shirt.
I thought he was outstanding. In obviously the 15-20 minute cameo against Montpellier, you couldn't read into that at all, but I thought he was so good against Bath. Bath really kind of came at Leinster in the first 10-15 minutes, and they forced him into some errors and they made it scrappy. But that's been a bit of the story of Bath's season, where they front up initially but then fall apart thereafter. And once Leinster didn't lose their patience, once they grew into the game, they just Bath didn't have the answers for the speed of which they're playing the game, the speed of the ruck ball, the decision making, the angles of running. Leinster were they turned into this well-oiled machine and they ripped them apart. And I think take a lot of confidence in knowing that a lot of those players are going to be playing internationally, and the style in which they're playing, it's so far removed from a game we've seen, even 2-3 years ago. The offloading game, where beforehand you might have had 4 or 5 offloads from a team over the course of a Six Nations game. Now you might get that from an individual. So the mindset is totally changed, and that's obviously come through the way it's being coached, the way it's being taught via Leinster, via the provinces. But it's a complete mental flip of understanding what they need to do to excel and to improve and to change, and to also play the way they want to play. No one wants to play kick chase. No one wants to play nudge the corners. Yeah, I know that the South African brand is winning rugby, but I wouldn't thank you for chasing kicks and playing no rugby in your own half, that's sometimes the best place to attack when there's three men in the backfield and you go from your own 22, you go from your own line out of the French in the 80s and 90s. That's exciting. And to have that scope and that license to do that, I think must be very encouraging from an Irish perspective. And sometimes they overplay their hand as well. But for the most part, I think the way they're expressing themselves, the way everyone is an option, everyone's a viable running viable lines, and then when you've got someone like Johnny Sexton being able to pick the pass, it all augurs well for where the game or where the team is going.
He gets to this point now for the 2022 Six Nations where he's essentially had 2 COVID-enforced breaks. Not that this year's one was as long as the previous one, but still at that age, I assume that this just adds an extra little bit of longevity to the career, just freshens the batteries nicely before what's going to be a massive 18 to 20 months.
Completely. We were saying on the TV at the weekend, and we said it on here before, is Johnny Sexton predominantly going to be an Ireland player? The answer is yes, he will be. He's not hanging around. He'll say himself he's hanging around for more European Cups. Of course he is. I don't think he's overly concerned about what happens in the URC, being brutally honest. But there's other players being able to fill in that role anyway. They're lucky that they've got really good quality URC 10s. So I guess he is there to peak at different times of the season, and this is one of the main times, coming into Six Nations and then subsequently coming into the knockout stages of European rugby. It's just trying to manage him, but he's in great shape, and he's saying that he hasn't felt this good for a long time. So you've got to listen to the player too. If he felt he needed a break, he would take it, because there's no point in peaking now and not being around in 18 months' time. But it does feel as though he's getting better with time on the ball, that the game is slowing down. He is maturing. The way he's maturing, he's able to not panic. He's like that aged quarterback. He really is, like a Peyton Manning or Brady or any of the greats, where it feels like they're about to be caught, and then all of a sudden, the last second they're able to pick the pass, and that's the one that completely unlocks the defence. The longer you hold it, the more chance you have of people holding defenders, and then if you can pick the right option, then it's going to be gangbusters. So that's what I was seeing at the weekend. His choice of options, his little kicks through, his always playing high tempo. Leinster were playing such a high tempo game. Bath are out on their feet, and I think Ireland will try and do that as well. Really squeeze the opposition and back their fitness. So does augur well, but yet we're still going to be having this conversation over the course of the next 18 months. The reality is we're going to be relying on a 37, 38-year-old out half. We do need to get the others game time.
So how do you see this playing out if we start with Joey Carbery? Because as I've already said, we haven't seen him in the Red of Munster over the last little while, but he's fit enough for this squad. He's going to be thrown in essentially without much match experience going into this game, match fitness I should say, going into whatever his first game is going to be. Is that enough to just see you through 60 to 80 minutes if that's what it ends up being, if that's what he needs to do for the Wales game?
Yeah, listening to Andy Farrell, he's talking about it, he's raring to go, he's super fit, so obviously he's been working very hard. I think there's certain positions, certain players that it doesn't matter as much. I think when you're the playmaker, when you're someone that's dictating play, I think you get so many touches at training anyway, so you get your eye in. And I know the intensity of international rugby ratchets up considerably on training, but I never worry massively about the out halves. It's often players in other positions that maybe don't have quite the same skill set as your 10 or your 9 that struggle to, need a couple of games to properly incorporate themselves into match speed, match intensity. That's never really been the case with Johnny. I don't see it being the case with Joey. And Joey's, in reality, the likelihood is in a few of the games he's only going to be getting 15 or 20 minutes. That'll be if the games aren't on a knife edge, that if Ireland are more than a couple of scores ahead, that's when he'll come on with 20 minutes to go to get some game time. He'll start probably against Italy. That is, dependent on what Johnny's fitness is like over the course of the Six Nations. So I think you will see him getting game time. I think all the calls for for Jack Carty getting game time, the Six Nations, I'm not sure if it's going to transpire. He might get something in the summer then in New Zealand. He might get something later on in November, but maybe he'll sit on the bench for the Italian game, and he might get 20 or 25 minutes in that game just to make sure that he's getting some game time. But other than that, if Joey's fit, he's definitely Ireland's number 2. He did a great job against New Zealand, finished closing the game out in a non-Joey Carbery type game where he could kick his goals, play a little bit tighter, and do basics very well. So he's firmly the number 2 still, and he's very important to where this team is going to go.
And that's the really interesting thing about Carbery in this year's Six Nations, is the fact that his minutes, hopefully from an Irish perspective, will involve trying to shut down a game, trying to see Ireland to the finish line, whereas Joey Carbery traditionally would be viewed as a bit of a game breaker, and that's where his strengths lie. Has he found that with his own maturity over the last little while, that ability to be a bit more calm and composed as opposed to performing the extraordinary?
I think you've got to find yourself fitting into whatever the environment you're put on for, be it injury, be it closing the game out, being chased at the game. The last thing you want to be is a one-trick pony of just being the guy that's able to play fast and free and open. If you want to play international rugby, you've got to be able to kick your goals. You've got to play corners. You've got to play percentages. You've got to play low error rugby, and that's the reality of it. That's why lots of guys have shown great potential domestically and then struggled to make the step up to international level, because they don't have that game necessitated, that control aspect. I don't know, and I don't want to be unfair to Quade Cooper, but maybe in the past that's where he fell down, where he's this crazy talent, but yet actually running a team is a massive component of international rugby. And he's subsequently learned to turn his game around and change his game and be a bit more of an influence from that perspective. And Joey showed those signs early on, but I do think he's evolved his game, and there's more strings to his bow than there were initially. But there's no great shock in that. That's experience too, and that's coaching and understanding different pictures over the course of your 5, 6, 7 years playing at high level international and provincial rugby, that you get to experience more scenarios, and then you're better equipped the next time they come around.
What's really interesting on Carbery is how these next couple of years, I guess, develop on both fronts, on the Ireland front and on the Munster front. It seems almost right now his position with Ireland is more defined than his one with Munster. Obviously, it comes down to the fact that he hasn't played much recently, but it feels that right. He's second in line to Johnny Sexton, and whenever Johnny Sexton gets injured, or whenever his form dips or whatever, Joey Carbery slots into that 10 jersey. That seems pretty simple. Whereas on the Munster front, talk of 15 just won't go away, Brian. It seems that the two kids who've come up this season, and Jack Crowley and Ben Healy, have stoked that a little bit. People are looking at them saying they're big lads, they're well able to hold themselves at number 10. How do we find a way of getting one of those two guys and Joey Carbery onto the same pitch, where it feels, and maybe this is because Hugo Keenan is so bloody good, that we're just not having that complicated conversation at Ireland level?
Yeah, and that's the difficulty as well. I think from a provincial perspective, you want to get your best players on the pitch. Well, not just provincial, internationally as well. Sometimes they don't always have to fit perfectly, but if they're good footballers, they can play wherever. And that's the case with Joey. He could play 15, no doubt. Yes, it's being a bit unfair to Mike Haley, because he's been very good. And why would you immediately think that Joey would be a better option than Mike Haley, who's been super secure at 15 for Munster? So I guess if I was Andy Farrell, I definitely wouldn't want my backup out half to be playing in another position for his provincial team. I would want him staying at 10. And Joey, in reality, should want to remain at 10. He's the incumbent, Irish 10 in 18 months' time, behind Johnny Sexton. It's coming. He's had to bide his time. He's had to be patient. I think his injuries haven't allowed him to properly challenge for the starting berth. And also the fact that Johnny has shown, pretty good consistent form over the last number of years. So those two factors probably have stalled his growth a little bit, and his ability to kind of really prosper internationally, but it's coming. So I would be staying put if I was him. I would be encouraging whoever the new coach of Munster is to maintain, keep him in the 10 jersey, and for him just to get a little bit of luck of not picking up any more of these injuries. And they all seem to be kind of breaks and awkward ones, and you just can't legislate for them. So he just needs a good run of kind of games to get himself into it. He's very important to the Irish setup. It feels like he's nearly more important to Ireland than he is to Munster at the moment because of those backups as well. And that's not being unfair to Jack Carty or to the Byrne brothers, but the reality is I do feel as though there's a gulf from Joey down to the next group. I thought Harry was going to be, the prodigal son. I thought he was going to be the answer, and it hasn't transpired. Ross has had his chances and it just hasn't materialised. Billy Burns likewise. Carty, maybe he does deserve an opportunity, but from where I'm looking, it does feel as though there's Johnny, a big gap, Joey, a decent gap, and then the others.
When it comes to perhaps limited opportunities for exciting players, I think we can look towards some of the Ulster players in that backline in Andy Farrell's squad ahead of this year's Six Nations. In particular, over the last few weeks, you would have been covering the Champions Cup, obviously, for BT. Brian, the likes of James Hume, Robert Ballacoon and Michael Lowry have shone. They've got Ireland fans very excited. How much game time do you think we're going to see from these guys? But in the long term, how excited are you?
Well, long term, very excited about the prospect of certainly two of the three of them. I guess you won't know what Mike Lowry, how he can he survive at international level until you throw him in. Will he get game time in this year's Six Nations? I'm not sure. Italy is the obvious choice, of game where you could potentially, give him a run out in a keenly contested game, but yet where you would definitely expect to get the better of them, particularly at home, and not find it overly arduous or challenging. I guess with the other two, with Hume and with Ballacoon, I think there should be great excitement around the two of them. Hume has really kind of sprung onto the scene in the last year in particular. I know he's been there for a little while, but some of his performances, against Claremont, against Northampton, very, very consistent. It feels like he's international ready just from his body size, his shape, his physicality. Defensively looks pretty solid, very, very confident, scoring tries, making line breaks. It just feels as though he's a natural fit into that environment. And what it will do, if he's not selected, it's going to put pressure on Gary Ringrose, on the other centres to deliver or consistently deliver their performances. Ringrose is playing well in his own skin. Henshaw and Aki, when I watched them, have also been very good. So the competitiveness of that environment is going to only feed better performances from the two that are selected. So I think that's a great thing. And then Ballacoon on the wing. I'm really, really excited about this guy. I think athletically, I don't know if there's too many better athletes out in that Irish setup. He is obviously very, very fast, brilliant footwork, but I think there's way more to his game. I think he's decent in the air. I think he certainly doesn't shirk his defensive responsibilities. I think he's learning an awful lot, and being in an environment with the likes of Keith Earls will be very important to him, of being able to learn from one of the best defensively. So I think as much as Stockdale was the one that burst onto the scene a few years ago, I think there's potential for Ballacoon to really embed himself in this team. And again, a bit like Keith Earls on the way out, Ballacoon then becomes a pivotal player along with Conway, along with Lowe, vying for a starting berth there, and Larmour too. So I think this guy is going to be there for a while, because again, with that speed, you scare defences and that footwork, and you want to get as many of those guys on your team as you can.
Given the clean bill of health, is it worth taking a gamble, and it's only a small gamble, on someone like Ballacoon from the start of a big game like the Wales game, given that maybe 13 or 14 of the other players alongside him are your first choice? Is this basically an area where you can afford to take a gamble?
Thing is, I don't think it's that much of a gamble with him. I really don't. I think if if you looked across the board at other selections, he would, I'd feel huge comfort in putting him into any environment. I don't think that the occasion would be too much for him. I think he's done well for Ireland. He probably needs to get a bit busier, looking for a bit more ball. Was it against Argentina that he was a little bit passive and kind of stayed on his wing a little bit more? And you look alternatively to what the likes of James Lowe did over November and how often he turned up looking for ball off 9. And I know that's his power game, but Balakoon has to, rather than holding his width, and there is an aspect of that to his game, he's got to go searching for the ball. When you don't get touches, you got to play your way into the game and not stay cold out on the wing. You got to get after it and build your own confidence within the confines of the game plan. So it does feel like he could definitely fit into the starting 15. I guess you're just looking at the balance of what you want from your back three. In Keenan and Conway, they're not tiny guys, but they're not big guys. And so can you get Conway on the left wing and Balakoon on the right? Are they very much right wingers? What's the balance looking like? Are you going to get a left footer in there? Obviously, with no Stockdale, no Lowe, who's going to be that second exit option when you have Johnny on the right? So I think there's lots of questions to be asked around the personnel, but it does feel like Balakoon could definitely go into that environment now and be a starter for sure.
Does it feel a little bit as if it's starter or nothing? He's just not as versatile as someone like Michael Lowry, for example.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be. He's not a bench player, is he? I think as a bench player, you've got to offer back three, or Keith Earls obviously plays wing, centre. It is. It's a starting berth, or you're going to be 24th or 25th man for the likes of himself.
So just on Lowry then, what are you looking to see from him over the next little while if he doesn't get significant game time to Six Nations? So how does he prove himself to you, to Andy Farrell, perhaps most importantly?
Well, I think he needs to prove himself at training first and foremost. I think he's got to be a nuisance. I think he's got to be scare the team that is being selected, because you get an awful lot of time as the opposition to run your own patterns, run the Welsh plays or run the French plays the week after next, that they will have analysed and gone, right, these are the favoured plays of the opposition we're going against. How are we going to defend it? And so he will get a chance, be it at 10 or at 15, to go and have a proper cut-off the Irish team that is selected to play in those games. And if he can go and cause them issues and show and give confidence to the coaching ticket, well, then, the next step for after that is to actually get a cap. And I'm sure the timing of the Italy game is kind of perfect as well. Get a couple of performances under our belt. Is it the fourth game that we play against Italy, or the third game? Third game, I think. Yeah. Third game. So perfect. If you get a couple of performances, God forbid, if you got 2 wins, then I think the pressure comes off to try a few new things, try a couple of players that also you do earmark. You are earmarking for inclusion in the squad in 2023. The fact that Lowry plays 10 as well could be that additional 10. I think that's his calling card, of that he can play at 15. He could play on the wing, at a push, but he also plays 10. Last thing you want to do is having to carry a third 10 like they did with Johnny's injury and with Joey's injury a couple of years ago. I think no one expected Jack Carty to be selected initially. But it was through necessity and through lack of confidence in the other two's fitness that he was selected. In a perfect world, you have that quasi back 3 10 player, and that's where Lowry fits the mold perfectly.
Is there a world in which you see number 10 being his Ulster future? Is that a part of a constellation that would work best for Dan McFarland?
Potentially. I think he's such a threat himself, and I think 10s that are a major threat with big footwork on the line always stick defences down inside first and foremost and create space outside. So provided he's happy enough taking the ball to the line and getting hit and being the fall guy at times and being brave there, I think there is scope. Billy Byrne's a very nice passer of the ball, but he plays off the line sometimes. And from an outside back perspective, he doesn't encourage the defence to him as much as some 10s do. Whereas if Lowry can learn to do that and play square and attract them on the inside, the knock-on effect to creating space for those, from 12 out is significant. And he obviously needs to marry a really good kicking game with that. I don't know if he kicks goals at all, but if he's going to be a 10, you're not a goal-kicking 10, you're going to have to pick a 15 that kicks goals, or you have a 9 that kicks goals. I guess Ulster are lucky in that they have Doak and Cooney, both goal kickers, so he doesn't have to worry about that. But internationally, I guess you want your out half kicking goals.
I get the sense from what you said about James Hume a moment ago that you really see the sky's the limit for this guy, that there is a world in which the Aki, Ringrose, Henshaw triumvirate isn't as vice-like, their grip isn't as vice-like on those three positions that are attached to midfield when you include the substitute, obviously.
100%. There's no doubt that this guy is going to rattle the three of them in camp. He's got that physique that it's almost like a Jonathan Davis type physique. He's big, strong. I think he's got better footwork than Jonathan Davis. He's a powerful athlete. He's thick in the hips. He's durable. I guess I need to see a little bit more of his defensive understanding at the highest level to kind of make a better assumption as to what he's like in that from that perspective. I think that's where Ringrose has a real strength. As much as he might be chalked down statistically as having misses, he makes some great reads. He forces a lot of play back inside. He makes some very, very important hits. None more important than the collision on Jordy Barrett in the All Black game in November. So, he's the guy in possession at the moment, and Hume is going to have to continue playing the way he is playing to displace him. But he just brings something slightly different to the 13 jersey than Gary is capable of doing. But yeah, it keeps Ringrose on his toes, making sure that he continues to churn out good performances if he's picked in the 13.
That piece about the footwork that's akin to Jonathan Davis, is that something that you can't really teach? Because I remember when Jordan Larmour burst onto the scene, everybody was talking about the fact that he can step off both feet, and there's only so much coaching you can do to allow somebody to get to that level so young. Is Hume kind of in that same bracket where he's got that innate ability footwork wise?
Yeah, I think so. I have a feeling, I don't know if it's left or right, I need to analyse him a little bit more, of a feeling that he has a preference on one foot. Right. And if he can balance that up where you don't know from either foot, which is the stronger, I think that will be a huge strength, because he then subconsciously isn't worried about it. He's not sizing himself up to pick one side or the other. There are brilliant players out there, players like Ricky Flutie, very nice footballer for England, but it was very much left foot dominant, and you could defend it knowing that it was coming back. Whereas if you sit and wait for a left foot step and someone also all of a sudden burns you or steps hard off their right and is gone, the analysis of players now and of individuals and what their traits and what their go-to plays are is significant. So if you make yourself very unreadable, that's going to be an additional string to your bow too. So yeah, it's something that he needs to self-analyze. He needs to be aware of what he is and isn't doing, and then counter it with the training that's needed to make sure that he's a harder read.
If we zoom out from the Ireland squad at the moment and we analyse the form of some of the other backs playing in Irish rugby at the moment, Jimmy O'Brien has been sensational over the last couple of weeks. You're looking at him and we often wonder where will the next great talent come from in any position, where it's like, can Munster, Connacht or Ulster produce somebody who might be able to fill position X or Y? Chances are the answer is Leinster will just have another guy who steps up and is going to be as good as the position that you're looking to fill. Jimmy O'Brien, I mean, he's not new on the scene or anything like that, but it does feel the last couple of weeks have been really important for him, that he has gone up that extra gear.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I guess just to interject, I think a lot of kind of people will be roaring at their pod at the moment and saying, what about Mac Hansen? By the way, he's the guy that's actually in the camp at the moment, and fully justified at that. I've been super impressed with him. He's a different player than Jimmy O'Brien, but he is someone that makes things happen and doesn't have many poor moments. He, even on the back foot, sometimes he can turn, get you an extra couple of yards, and that's what's needed for the next phase to make a proper impact in the game. So I understandably, I do think that Mac Hansen's ahead of Jimmy O'Brien, albeit he scored 4 tries last weekend. He defended very well. He's done himself massive favours on pushing himself forward into the international reckoning, but he needs to consistently play for Leinster first and foremost. I think you've got to nudge out the current players. There's not going to be no easy task with the likes of Larmour and the likes of James Lowe being in there, but how do you get your opportunity? You take advantage of someone else's issue or injury issues or lack of form, and at the moment it's James Lowe is the guy sitting out with a torn hamstring. He's got to take advantage of those opportunities that come his way, and scoring 4 tries and defending well and being high octane, high energy for 80 minutes is going to do him a massive plus on the ledger, on the Andy Farrell ledger. Could you put Jimmy O'Brien straight into the international team and not worry massively? I think you probably could, but I think that is the calibre of the team and the squad at the moment, that there's not that many players in the current squad that you wouldn't be comfortable putting in and feeling they couldn't do almost as good a job as the number 1 selections.
If we get back to, and we will come to Connacht at the moment, because I just want to talk about their knockout tie in the Heineken Cup, obviously, in a couple of months' time. But just if we stay along the Six Nations line at the moment and going back to some of the other teams that emerged from the launch the other day, just wanted to get your take quickly on England. And we had Jeremy Guscott on the show during the week making the point that, it's 20 games between now and the World Cup. And I think sometimes we forget that all the other nations have this obsession with the World Cup like we do as well. We just perhaps have a repetition about getting past a quarter final. Like, on England's plate this year, like, is this going to be a situation where it is a down year, in as much as England can have a down year, and that we expect them to just curve beautifully up right in time for the World Cup next year, because Eddie Jones has shown that in the last World Cup cycle that he's got an ability to do that?
Well, I think that what they've always done historically, they haven't worried as much in the middle of the cycle as to what happens. It is an opportunity to try out players, to work who's going to be in your squad, who has the potential, and until you do try those individuals out, you'll never truly know. And Six Nations rugby is different than Tour rugby or November rugby. There's an intensity to it that's almost non-transferable to even though the other aspects of international rugby are always very physical, there's a mystique to Six Nations rugby, and if you're able to do it at that against good opposition in kind of difficult cauldrons, Twickenham, Cardiff, Murrayfield, Paris, all of them are very tough places to go and play. If you can deliver there, will you give a shot of confidence to your coach? I think if you look at the England team at the moment, I've just got it up here, it definitely feels like they're transitional. But who knows anything about Bevan Rodd, Jamie Blamire? They don't know, obviously, what's his name? Don Brandt is coming through. Simmons is just back into the reckoning. So from the England teams that we associate with the Vunipolas, that feels as though it's gone. There is a changing of the guard, and yes, there's some of the staples there, but we've now got Marcus Smith at 10. We got Freddie Stewart at 15. These are guys that in Ireland, unless you're a Gallagher Premiership fan, you don't know, and so they've only got a couple of caps. So they have to be tried and tested in a more intense Six Nations environment, which we're going to see, and we'll get a better reflection of what sort of players they are. But yet, that for me, I think Ireland feel a bit more of a settled team, which makes me nervous that we're settled 2 years out, whereas they're still very much trying things.
I was going to say, we've seen this one before, have we?
We have. I think it's different because they've got, this team have the experience of having seen it themselves before, that they know that if they remain stagnant and continue doing what they're doing now, that it won't be enough to go and get to a semi-final or a final or win a World Cup. So that's the reality of it. And they're still going to have to deliver one of their all-time great performances in a quarterfinal if they get there against France or New Zealand. So nothing's changed. But they are very conscious that they need to continue to grow and improve and get better. That what they're delivering now might seem great, but it's not going to be enough in 2 years' time.
Rugby and Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, official sponsor of the Irish Rugby team. Team of us, everyone in. You're listening to Brian O'Driscoll looking ahead to the 2022 Six Nations. And something we have certainly seen before is Eddie Jones laying down the gauntlet on the launch day of the Six Nations. He was talking about Antoine Dupont this week. He says Dupont is a very good player and it's a big call to make him captain because the Nines have got a lot on their plate. But obviously head coach Fabien Galthié thinks he can handle that, and it's certainly not for me to tell him what to do. As you know, being a Frenchman, you are sitting at the top of the tree in the Six Nations and you are red hot favourites. Got the luxury of having 43 players in camp, so your Grand Master of French Rugby, Bernard Laporte, has done a great job in getting the clubs to work with the French Union, so you've got no excuses. All of that comes with a price, and I'm sure Antoine is going to be able to handle it. Just a slight ribbing of giving the captaincy to one of the younger players in that French squad. Is that something that tends to happen as a young captain, that the microscope is on you a little bit and people see that as a weakness?
Yeah, but different if you've just been named World Player of the Year, isn't
True.
it? And that you won European and domestic double last year. You've just beaten the All Blacks for the first time in since 70 something in Paris.
You're also 25. It's like he isn't a kid at this point. He's been around for a few years.
I don't know Antoine Dupont, but he looks a pretty solid guy. He looks relatively mature. He's got to do some of his growing up, or has had to do some of his growing up in the last couple of years in particular, very much in the spotlight. But he's answered all of the questions that any critic has, the consistency of performance. I think 9 is the best position to captain from, personally. Right. I think you're in the coalface. You're at every ruck. You're close quarters to the referee. He's seeing the same picture that you're seeing. So to be honest with you, it feels like you're best positioned to be able to manipulate him into making the same decisions that you're feeling, without gesticulating, without annoying him. And I think that's all about temperament. That's all about what sort of person you are. And certainly, he looks a relatively unflappable guy. I've never seen him being overly ecstatic when there's been a high, and I've never seen him, throw the toys out of the cot either when things haven't gone their way. That's not to say that he doesn't have that in him, but he seems like a pretty solid guy across the board, and that is what you need in captaincy. You don't need high emotion one way or another. You need someone that's a good communicator, someone that's going to work with referees and that's going to encourage the team in going the right direction. Who better to do that than one of the marshals of the game as your number 9? So for me, it's the perfect fit. And why not make your best player your captain as well, to inspire them with your own individual performances too?
There is obviously a bit of a kind of a threatened Eddie Jones coming out there. I think that everybody realises that France are probably the most gifted squad in this year's Six Nations. Do you go along with his assertion, first of all, that they're top of the tree on their own, or do you see maybe Ireland or England being on close to a level par with them?
I think Ireland and England are probably just that rung below them, but I do think France at the moment, from a talent point of view, from what we've seen in the last over November, what we've seen in aspects throughout last year's Six Nations, where they're still very much a development team. They've been so brave in getting rid of everyone over 30, to realise that they were absolutely building towards France 2023, and even with players in good form that didn't fit the age profile, they were just cut. And so I guess they were fortunate they didn't have to take too much pain, that they managed to get enough results in that period of time to take the pressure off the coach, that it wasn't just results-based business. And the fact that they denied Wales the slam this year. They have had big victories. The first win, like I said, against the All Blacks in a long time, but also the manner of the performance. And they've got this young brigade coming through that have never really lost, don't have the baggage of previous French teams around World Cups and so on. So it's all kind of bubbling nicely for them, but they're still going to have to do it. There's still going to be an insane amount of pressure on them in 2 years' time or 18 months' time when they host a home World Cup. And there is the expectation. They're the one team that should have won the World Cup that hasn't won it at this point. So it just means, how do those individuals deal with the pressure? So far, very, very well. that doesn't mean that it doesn't come to a head at a future point.
And as I say, if we think we obsess about the World Cup, imagine the level of obsession that's going to be going on in French rugby circles over the next 18 months in the build up to that, especially if they go and do back-to-back Six Nations now. And just a couple of other bits before we go back to the Champions Cup. Just on Wales, obviously, ahead of next week. We'll properly preview it next week. But Wayne Pivac says Wales are undercooked. They're obviously missing a lot of players. Massive outsiders is how they've been referred to. This just paints quite a dangerous picture, I think, before the first week, does it, Brian? They're 6-1 in some places for the Ireland game alone on week 1. Some of us have learnt our lessons about writing Wales off too soon.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. They always deliver at Six Nations, irrespective of what's going on with the regions. For years, the regions have underperformed, not delivered both domestically and particularly in Europe. The only, along with Scotland, I don't think they've had a European finalist. Well, maybe they did with Cardiff back in the 90s, but not since then. So how do they pull it together? And you have to remember too, before last year's Six Nations, Pivac's head was on the chopping block. They'd lost 6 and 8 or something, a terrible record, and all of a sudden, come the last weekend, they've been denied a Grand Slam by a score with 30 seconds to go. So yeah, I don't think we'll feel a huge amount of sympathy for them just at this moment in time, considering what's gone on in the past. But it does, from the outset, it does look as though they're a little bit light in the front 5. I don't think they know what their best centre pairing is, but if they can click at halfback with Thomas Williams and Bigger, they've got a very good back 3, Rhys Sammet, Adams and Liam Williams. If they can keep all of those fit and get a little bit of form from 2 centres, they will be competitive. I don't think they're going to be contesting this year's Six Nations. I don't think they're going to be winning it, but they will definitely pick up, and they will destroy someone else's plans for a Grand Slam or for a championship, that's for sure, because that's what they do well. Even when they're not firing on all cylinders, they still make an absolute nuisance of themselves. So yeah, it does feel transitional for them again, but it doesn't. I've heard 1 or 2 Welsh commentators struggling to see where the next batch of internationals are coming through from, particularly in some of those pivotal positions. Where's the next Alan Wynne-Jones coming from? Where's the next? I know Wynne-Jones there. Where's the next? Gethin Jenkins coming from, guys that consistently perform the highest level. And then the centres, Jonathan Davis has completely gone off the boil, and I just don't know where their go forward comes from there, and the consistency of performance. So yeah, jury's out a little bit on where they're at, but very, very wary of them at the same time. Yeah,
and I'm sure part of the reasoning behind the prices is the fact that they're coming to Dublin as well, and I guess soundly beaten in Dublin 2 years ago. Maybe that gave us then the false sense of hope going to Cardiff last year, and we all know how that panned out in the end. Just to finish up then on a couple of the Champions Cup fixtures coming up that have been, I guess, confirmed this week in the aftermath of last weekend. First of all, a brilliant end to the pool stages. So much drama. Part of that drama obviously was in Connacht's game against Stade. Back-to-back weeks where they have been excellent for the majority of the games, Brian, but it is back-to-back weeks where they've had a bit of disappointment. We go into a Six Nations.
Are you rowing back on your initial early week negativity? Are you trying? Is it because Andy Friend is on the show coming up that you're trying to stick it into reverse?
How do you dare even suggest such a thing, Brian? As if I would succumb to human nature or something like that. Tell me this: would Connacht not have been unbelievably disappointed with how the last 2 weeks went for them in the end?
I do agree with you. I think the last thing that they want to be is patronised. That it's like the Ireland of the 90s. Put up a great fight for 60, 65 minutes, but ultimately fall apart in the last 15. No one wants to be that. And they have earned the right to not be that team anymore with some of their performances. They should be bitterly disappointed about the manner in which they've let comfortable leads, particularly against Leicester, slides, the negative way that they tried to close out the game, the poor game management, sitting back and defending the lead rather than playing the way they had to get themselves in that position. I think against Stad really ratcheted it up, and we were covering that game. What a brilliant game of rugby.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed with some of the Connacht scores, and they had one or two. They had a try chucked off as well that was crossing, but their launch plays are really good. They're pushing the pass. They're playing a little bit of that brand that we came to associate a few years ago. Then it regressed, and now we're back there again. That they're playing to their strengths. They can't match teams power for power, so they've got to manipulate defensive. They've got to take risks, and I think show a little bit of that skill set that we're all aware is there, but that has really come out with the coaching under Andy Friend. So they should be very disappointed. They let two big leads slip, and that's ultimately not good enough. And as Jack Carty said after, they lost 3 from 4 in the knockout stages or in the group stages of Europe, but yet they have qualified with one good victory. That's not going to be enough for you to get beyond a Leinster team. You're going to have to be an 85-minute performance.
Outside of that obvious point that, it's going to need to be a full performance, is there anything else within that performance that they need to bring to the table, that they need to work on over the next 2 months to give themselves a puncher's chance, especially with the second leg in Dublin?
I think defensively, whatever about in attack, we've been talking a lot about how well they've been playing and the shape and how they've stretched defences. That's all well and good, but particularly against Leinster, they're in the European Cup, Champions Cup this year. They have averaged under 3-second rucks, and no team can defend against that. You just can't. You've got to slow the opposition ball down. So you're going to need to get some jacklers in there, and not just with numbers 6, 7 and 8 on their back. Everyone's going to have to slow the ball down. You're going to have to be a bit more impactful in the collision, fight on the ground, second efforts from the tackler to make sure that it becomes 4 or 5 second rucks where your defensive line can organise themselves. You can get your spacings, and then you can get off the line. Those things are just vitally important to slowing any team down. But when you're looking at a team with the calibre and the strike force of Leinster, I think it's kind of a perfect storm, and you're going to have to deliver a phenomenal defensive performance, which they've vastly improved that, but it's definitely not been an 80-minute performance. And if they do what they did to Leicester and let Leinster off to a couple of early scores, it could be horror show stuff. So they're going to have to really improve on that side of their performance and become an absolute nuisance at ruck time.
On the other side of that semi-final draw, what are the chances of an Ulster-Munster quarter-final in your view?
Well, it's pretty unfair on Ulster, isn't it? Where you win all 4 pool games, you qualify second, and through COVID, Toulouse, have obviously been limited to the amount of games they can play. Where you might have seen them gaining another 5 points, they lose 28-0, and so they find themselves in 7th on the other side of the pool, and you draw them home and away. It's obviously, they're the reigning European Cup holders. We haven't seen the same level of form this season that we did last year, but it's still Toulouse, and Toulouse in France in April. Can you contain them? Can you get yourselves back home with a scoreline where you can hang in? Because with Toulouse, there's firepower there. They will score against you home or away, but can you contain the scoreline over in Toulouse? Or even one better, can you go and get a victory over there where then you'll absolutely back yourself in Kingspan? It's a big ask. I think it's definitely it feels a little bit more achievable probably that Munster can go away to Sandy Park and back to Thomond and beat Exeter. Chiefs are improving as the season goes on, but they're not the Chiefs of the last few seasons just yet. It's all about containing Sam Simmons there. Keep him under wraps. He scored a hat-trick in the loss against Montpellier last weekend. He is unplayable. Do you know, there's a stat where he played his 100th game against Montpellier. He scored 75 tries in Europe and the Premiership. Like that's Pele stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it does feel as though I do think that Munster will probably forge their way through, but Ulster are going to need two monumental performances against Toulouse to get into quarterfinals.
Yeah, they certainly will. It is something to be really excited about, and even the novelty of the two-legged tie should be really interesting in April as well. But next week our attention will most definitely be on the Six Nations. It is Ireland against Wales in their first game up of the Six Nations next week. Brian O'Driscoll, great stuff. Happy birth week once again.
Thanks a lot, Owen. Cheers.
Cheers.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.